to take place in Ghost US. Up next, all new Dragon's Den.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Parsha Pearls once more. And we're going to look at something quite intriguing and a just general observation because, of course, we're currently reading the story of the Jewish servitude in Egypt. And it's a story that essentially encapsulates all of the trials and tribulations of Jewish life and living and history over the course of millennia. The story itself in the book of Exodus spans 3 portions. And it talks all about, again, the trials, the tribulations, the defeats, the triumphs, exile, and ultimately the Exodus. So indulge me, if you will. I want to share my imagination with you. Picture the following scenario. At the airport in Cairo, Egypt, there's an Egypt Air jet which lands. And on board is a man dressed in royal attire. And he's being transported from the past to come along and check out his native Egyptians. And of course, he has so much to catch up on. He disembarks and he's greeted by some official who warmly embraces him, and he speaks, but they don't understand a word he's saying. They locate a translator who knows some ancient Egyptian who's read a hieroglyph or two in his day. Who are you? The official asks through the interpreter. He says, I'm Pharaoh. I'm the king of the greatest empire in the world. What can we do for you? He says, how's my empire doing? Empire? What empire? It's crumbled. It's long gone. The Sphinx is in bad condition. He says, oh, that's terrible, Pharaoh responds. What about the solar temple of Ra? Are they still worshiping the sun god today? Pharaoh, there is no solar temple in Egypt. There are solar panels, but nobody worships them except maybe in California. What about my Hebrew slaves? Are they still building glorious pyramids? To be honest, Pharaoh, the Hebrews are still building, only now it's skyscrapers, technology, medicine, but not specifically for Egypt. They are a free and vibrant nation now, just next door. Pharaoh is bewildered, gets back on his plane. The future is not quite what he had imagined it would be. In another part of the world, an Alitalia flight lands at an airport near Rome. Again, an old man disembarks and adjusts his toga. He's trying to communicate, but once more, nobody understands what he's talking about. He keeps pointing to himself, Julius Caesar, waiting for everybody to bow before him. Nobody does. So they find a translator who knows ancient Latin, the far cry from the Italian that you will hear in Rome today. He says, take me to the Colosseum so I can enjoy watching the gladiators. And the translator hesitates. Mr. Caesar, around here, you're known more as a salad these days. The Colosseum is in ruins. Caesar says, okay, so take me to the Temple of Jupiter. Mr. Caesar, the translator replies, who is Jupiter? We have the Vatican here. It's a church, a different religion altogether called Catholicism. It's got a pope. The only Jupiter is a few million miles away. Well then, asks the emperor, how many nations nowadays are under the control of the mighty Roman Empire? Do we still control most of the world? And the man replies, no, we don't. There aren't that many people living in Rome nowadays. It's a small city in an almost bankrupt country. Ancient Rome is gone, its history, the stuff of bad movies. And so he too leaves despondent and dejected. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, both in Egypt and in Italy, an El Al aircraft lands in Tel Aviv. An old man with a flowing white beard steps off the plane. A government official sees this saintly-looking fellow, walks over to him and says, Shalom. And the man disembarking says, with a smile, Shalom. They immediately understand each other. It's an honor to meet you. What's your name? And the man replies, my name is Moshe. He says, really? My name is Moshe too. Moshe Katzenberg from Lud, born in Russia. He says, I'm Moshe Rabbeinu. Some call me Moses, from the desert, born in Egypt. Have you ever been to Israel before? Actually, says Moses, no, this is my first time, actually. My dear brother, Moshe Katzenberg, can I ask you for a big favor? And Katzenberg says, of course. I just finished flying through the night and I realized I don't have my tefillin with me. Can you tell me where I might be able to get a pair of tefillin? And without hesitation, Moshe Katzenberg says, you can borrow mine, no problem. And Moses continues and he's pleased. He says, listen, I don't mean to be a nutnik, but is there any place around here where I can catch a minyan for Shacharis, morning service? Betach Rabbeinu, Katzenberg replies, of course, Rabbi, right here in this new airport, we have a synagogue, not just one, 3 synagogues, Sfardim, Ashkenazim, Hasidim, whatever you like. Moshe proceeds to one of the synagogues, can't tell you which one, and the service begins. During the prayers, the worshipers take the Torah out and call Moses up for an aliyah. He's in awe, same Torah, written with exactly the same letters, and the one he himself communicated 3,300 plus years ago. He recognizes the script, same religion, same language, same commandments, same homeland. This is remarkable. And the message is clear. Every ancient people, from Egypt to Rome, was destroyed, scattered, disappeared into the mists of history. The Jewish people miraculously survived with their faith intact. And in our own parents' and grandparents' lifetimes, they were restored to sovereignty in their ancient homeland. And Hebrew, the language of the Torah that Moses communicated, is now the daily tongue of a vibrant nation of 7 million. As historian Barbara Tuchman wrote, Israel is the only nation in the world that is governing itself in the same territory, under the same name, and with the same religion and the same language as it did 3,000 years ago. That message speaks for itself in our current crisis. But how did this happen? How did a group of powerless slaves survive when even the mightiest of empires vanished? And the answer is this. Ancient Egypt and ancient Israel were nations that asked the ultimate question. How, in a world that changes, do we build a civilization that will endure? How do we defeat mortality? Pharaoh gave one answer, an answer that has long appealed to all kinds of rulers and kings. And that is that the strength of a nation lies in horses and chariots and tanks and armies and colossal buildings, essentially in power and wealth. Build these and your nation will defy all the vicissitudes of time. And Pharaoh did that. And Caesar did that. And today their civilizations are long gone. Their monuments survive, but their moment has passed. Moses gave a completely different answer. The strength of a nation does not lie in power and wealth. It depends on the values you engrave on the hearts of the next generation. Over and again, Moses instructs the people, tell your children the story of the Exodus. Explain how we were commanded to create a society that is the exact opposite of ancient Egypt, one based not on wealth or power, but on justice and compassion. A society where a loving God is sovereign and every citizen is created in his image. A society in which everyone has access to justice. Every mitzvah is cherished and everyone is treated with dignity. And teach your children these values. Encourage them to ask questions. Celebrate your Exodus annually and you will create an eternal people. Your story will endure and carry you along with it. And so, yes, in fact, every single year, as we come back to reading the book of Exodus, we celebrate the miraculous journey of the Jewish people across time. Scorned by a succession of tyrants from the past till present, we passed on our tradition. We overcame all obstacles with a fierce tenacity. We built loving homes. We battled barbarity with hope, menace, with mitzvah, and we outlived the strongest empires that history has known. As per this week's portion, 3,300 or so years ago, Pharaoh and Moses met in the arena, with Pharaoh on the throne and Moses armed with a simple message and a secret strength. All these years on, Pharaoh is left languishing in the arena, and history declares that Moses won. Now there's one more thing I'd like you to consider. I mean, the Torah gives a lot of airtime, as it were, to Pharaoh. It gets a lot of mention during these various portions. Why? Obviously, even he has something to teach us. That's right. Even the ruthless tyrant is referenced in the Torah however many times in order to convey to us a very profound life lesson. You know, there's something called the 10,000-hour rule. The 10,000-hour rule suggests that to properly master anything, one has to practice a skill for 10,000 hours. And the 10,000-hour rule apparently applies no matter whatever the skill or the craft. You want to become a master golfer or a master mechanic or a chef or a footballer, surgeon, or whatever, even a rabbi, you need to put in your 10,000 hours. But there's something that isn't quite clear. What kind of practice is required? Can you just go through the motions that many times and you'll somehow automatically become proficient? But just spend 10,000 hours on the golf course and become Tiger Woods? Note that the rule speaks of 10,000 hours in order to master a subject. Mastery is not the same as success. You can find many athletes who put in their 10,000 hours or more, and they might master their art, but they don't win a championship. There are teams like Spurs or Arsenal who have played tens of thousands of hours, and they still languish somewhere in the middle. So it is in every profession. Expertise doesn't necessarily translate into success, at least by any outward measurable or objective standard. What fundamentally is the rationale behind this theory of 10,000 hours? Is repetitiveness enough to enable one to become a master? Well, let's look at Pharaoh. There's a glaring and blatant injustice in the whole Exodus story. A recurrent theme we find throughout is reference to God hardening Pharaoh's heart, which implies that Pharaoh might have let the Jewish people go. Only God hardened his heart, hence he refuses to do so. And then thereafter, God rains plagues down upon him because of his refusal. Moses says, let my people go. Arguably, maybe Pharaoh wants to. God hardens his heart. He says no, and God punishes him. Where's the justice in that? That takes us back to the 10,000-hour rule. I'm intrigued by this ingenious method that my son and daughter-in-law have to ensure that their little kids stay in bed without waking them up early in the morning. Imagine, if you will, there's this clock that they have with an orange owl. It's lit up on a clock, and for as long as the owl is orange, the kids know you don't get out of bed. When it turns blue, then you can. And of course, you can program it to turn blue anytime you want. Begging the question, what makes boisterous children stay in bed? What makes them obey the color of the owl? It's the same principle. You become conditioned to function in a certain way. You become programmed, if you like, to adhere to certain guidelines. And I can tell you, they do not leave their room until that owl turns blue. I can envisage so many advanced versions of this same sort of idea to tame program adults as well, but I'll leave that to your imagination. The Talmud coined a phrase in Hebrew, or hergel na'aseh teva, which means when you do something enough times, it becomes second nature to you. In psychological terms, you become a creature of habit. When we are doing something that is habitual, we are not engaged in the task in the same way as when we are doing something that is not habitual. Consider making breakfast in your kitchen on any given weekday. Next time you do it, just watch how effortlessly it happens. Your movements through the kitchen are stereotyped. You grab the milk out of the fridge, you turn towards the counter, you give the door that little nudge with your foot that you know it needs. If something goes on your mind, you might not notice that you're sitting at the table and munching on your second piece of toast until you're halfway through it. Now compare that to getting breakfast at a friend's house. Where's the milk? Where's the bread? So complicated. The point is, when something is absolute routine to you, then it's routine to you. And on that basis, therefore, you go through the motions without any hassle. But when something is not routine, obviously you have to adjust accordingly. You know how sometimes we say, I just can't help myself. What does that mean? Someone resolves to change their bad habits, but time and again they fail. Why? You're failing because, simply put, habits are extremely hard to change. They're hard to change because they're so ingrained, because they're automatic. They become second nature to you. In Pharaoh's case, it's not that God deliberately hardened Pharaoh's heart. It's not that God impeded his free choice. That would be wholly unjust. Rather, initially, Pharaoh hardened his own heart several times over. He was committed to the persecution of the Jewish people. After that, he simply became addicted to the evil he was perpetuating. He could no longer break the cycle. Every time after a plague, when he said he would let the people go, he probably really meant it. But after the first 5 times when he hardened his own heart, even if in the midst of the suffering it made sense to him to break the cycle, no sooner does the plague stop afterwards and he's back to the vicious loop. So God hardening Pharaoh's heart really means that God implements the laws of nature as we know them, and by virtue of Pharaoh's own initial obstinance, his heart becomes invariably hardened such that he cannot help himself. He can no longer kick the habit. And the lesson for you and me is simple. let's be honest, as human beings, we are all creatures of one habit or another, which essentially defines something of our personality. The creature we become is defined by the habit we nurture. We first make our habits, and then our habits make us. What was it? Benjamin Franklin once said, your net worth to the world is usually determined by what happens when your bad habits are deducted from your good ones. So sometimes we need to take an inward look and ask ourselves, what are my habits? What do they say about me? How do they define me? If they're not good, how can I break them? And the point is this: there are certain things that we get used to doing. We get locked into patterns almost every day of our lives. And these idiosyncrasies are a major part of who we are. But fundamental to Jewish thinking, and indeed general psychology, is that there is no such a thing as this is who I am, this is all I can be. There's no such a thing as I am absolutely stuck in this pattern and there's no way out. It might sometimes be exceptionally difficult, but ultimately we are, as Maimonides says, in control of our own lives and destiny. The secret to breaking any bad habit is simply to change it to a good one. As Maimonides says, when you are veering in one negative direction, you have to first go to the opposite extreme before you can find your happy middle ground. Like a piece of paper bent one way, when you bend it back entirely the other way, are you able to straighten it? But more than anything, you have to want to change, and you have to be present and able to identify a bad habit as soon as you feel it emerging, and then look to replace it with something good. So yes, even Pharaoh has something to teach us, and that is that where bad habits can lead and how they can wreak havoc with our lives. But we also learn the ability to make changes, and a change in habit leads to a fundamental change in life. So the takeaway is cultivate your habits to be positive and meaningful, because whilst you can't change your future, you can change your habits, and they ultimately become your future and your destiny. Wishing you all